A secret emperor's open on slaves one evening in June 1260. The danger faced by the Mamluk Egyptian Sultan Part 2. Caucasus, Kipchaks, and Circassia, and made them the owners of the land of the pharaohs. It is Islam that brought these slaves against the great powers of their time, the same Egypt, which ever there used to be a valley of death for the slaves. It is Islam that gave a new life to the slaves in Egypt. Does any other civilization in the world have the courage to stand against the history of Islam? Those who criticize Islam for slavery may forget that slaves never got such respect even in Greece. In Greek civilization, which is considered as the mother of democracy, slaves were also considered as fourth-class people. Rome and Babylon, a far away 700 years in civilized Europe even after that. The worst examples of slavery are not hidden during the Industrial Revolution. What did Europe not do in its colonies? Did the bloodthirsty state that was born on the bones of 10 million Red Indians forget how 2 million slaves were taken from Africa to America? Let me say that all this was due to the shoes of my master and mullah, on whose threshold even great emperors used to bow their heads. This was the reason why most of the people would not only make slaves their sons but also arrange their education and training. There are many such incidents in history that people even married their daughters to their slaves, not only in society, in the government institutions. They got more quota than ordinary citizens. Often the slaves would even reach the position of army commander in Islamic countries. People often freed slaves, while their next generation was considered to be completely free from slavery, and people buy new slaves again, turning to the market, perhaps. This is the reason why the demand for slaves was always maintained in the Islamic world. For the slave traders, the markets of India and Cairo were no less than golden birds. In the 13th century AD, when Genghis Khan was conquering the river, the slave trade reached its peak. The mules sold their captives as slaves, and slave traders began to take them to the markets of Egypt and India in large numbers. The Ayyubid sultans would have bought them and recruited them into the army. These slaves would have been called Mamluks. Mamluk means ownership, even during the reign of Malik al-Salih. The number of Mamluks exceeded the local army. The Sultan built a fort for the Mamluks in the delta-like island of the Nile, so the Mamluks who settled here are called the naval Mamluks, while the Mamluks who settled on the towers of Cairo are called Burji Mamluks. Ruknuddin Baibars belonged to the naval Mamluks after the assassination of Iqtai Jamgar by the first Mamluk, Sultan Malik al-Mu'izz Aibak. He fled from Cairo and was recalled when Sultan Saif al-Din Quds assumed the reins of government. It was at that time when the Tartars were marching towards Egypt by raiding Syria, and the severed heads of the envoys of Halaku were hanging on the gates of Cairo. Halaku was about to appear across the Sinai Desert when a messenger from Karakorum informed him of the death of Khan.Azam Munka Khan. He left an army of 20,000 under his general Kutboga and returned in the hope that the crown of Khan.Azam might be placed on his head, be given when Kut saw this situation. He intended to fight in the plains of Syria instead of Cairo, since the mules were now equal in number to the Mamluks. Finally, on the 15th of Ramadan, the Mamluk army marched from Cairo and headed towards Syria along the coast Mediterranean, while the 1st Division of the Egyptian army under the leadership of Rukn al-Din Baibars, the mules, Crusaders Antioch, along the Jordan River, clashed with the united army of Armenia and Georgia. The misfortune of the Tartars was that they considered every 1st Division of the Egyptian army to be a whole army. So when Ruknuddin began to retreat, the mules started chasing him, unaware that this is what happened to the Tatars when the Sultan's horsemen got rid of their anger and went ahead, the arrows started raining from the surrounding hills. The Tatars took care and ran back, because Ruknuddin suddenly turned around while running in front. Unfortunately, when the Tatar army turned back, they found themselves surrounded by the Sultan army. The Tatars were not cowards either. They started to freeze and fight. When the hell of the war broke out, the Tatars formed an Islamic army and pressed the right side. Kipchaks was standing on a rock and controlling the army. When he saw this scene, he got angry and threw off his armor and himself and took his reserve squad and rushed to help the right side, the Mamluk soldiers. Seeing the Sultan's army rushing towards the enemy like a whirlwind, turned back and immediately saw that the left wing of the Tatar army was completely destroyed. After that, the Tatars could not hold out for long. When they were fleeing, the blood-killing horsemen again moved quickly and drove them to the banks of the Jordan River. Very few Tatars survived this deadly attack. Haliku's commander Kutboga was captured, and the Tatars were completely wiped out from the land of Syria. This battle became famous in history as Battle of Goliath. This battle closed the door of Africa to the mules forever. And every time they faced the Mamluks, they suffered a crushing defeat. It is also a strange coincidence that the mules humiliated the rulers of the Islamic world, but were always defeated by their slaves. At the same time when the Mamluks were in power in Egypt, a dynasty of slaves was ruling in India, which is known in history as the Slave Dynasty. The Mamluks did not allow the mules to advance beyond the Nile, but the slaves of India did. Their path was blocked on the Indus River. One woman ruled in both the families. In Egypt, Shajara-Ul-Ildur was the queen, and in India, Razia was Sultana. The title of the first Sultan of Mamluks was Aibak, and the first Sultan of the Gulam dynasty was Khan.Medieval Aibak. Thus, these Mamluks and Gulams are a bright chapter in the history of the nation of Islam. Tamad.